Michoacán, Mexico. A land of green hills, avocado orchards, and dirt roads washed in blood. For centuries, it was known for its soil, its fruit, its silence. But in the 20th century, silence gave way to gunfire. Luis Valencia was born into that silence and into that gunfire. He was not the first Valencia to walk those hills, and he would not be the last. The Valencia clan was not just a family, it was a dynasty. Their roots sank deep into Michoacán's Tierra Caliente, a region where poverty met opportunity, where farmers grew corn by day and tended hidden poppy fields by night. The government called them criminals. The locals called them providers, and to the Valencias, it was never crime, it was survival. Luis grew up in a world where the line between farmer and trafficker was paper thin. Every child knew the smell of wet earth after rain. Every child knew the sharp scent of opium paste drying in hidden barns. It was part of the landscape, as ordinary as avocados, as ordinary as blood. By the 1980s, Mexico's drug map was being redrawn. The Guadalajara cartel rose under Felix Gallardo, binding traffickers from Michoacán, Jalisco, Colima, and beyond. The Valencias were there, watching, learning. Not at the center, not yet, but close enough to see how empires were built. Armando Valencia Cornelio, Luis's cousin, was the first to carry the family name into legend. El Maradona, charismatic, bold. He took the family's marijuana and poppy routes and gave them structure. He called it the Milenio cartel. It wasn't the biggest cartel, it wasn't the richest, but it was disciplined, efficient, and it had blood ties across Michoacán and Jalisco. Luis stood in his shadow, a quieter figure, not a showman, not a legend. But he understood the family code. Power comes not from the stage, but from the back room, not from noise, but from silence. August 2003. Armando was arrested in Tlajomulco de Zúñiga, Jalisco. The godfather of Milenio was gone. The family empire was exposed. Rivals circled like vultures. The government thought it was the end, but it was only the beginning. With Armando in chains, leadership fell to the next in line, Luis Valencia and Oscar El Lobo Nava Valencia. Two men, two cousins, two survivors of a crumbling dynasty. They inherited not just routes and money, but enemies. Tamaulipas to the north, Colima to the west, Sinaloa breathing down their necks. Every territory was contested. Every ally was a traitor in waiting. Luis understood the rules. Violence wasn't chaos, it was policy. Drugs weren't contraband, they were currency. Family wasn't love, it was survival. The Milenio cartel under Luis and El Lobo became a shadow state across Michoacán, Jalisco, Colima, Nuevo León, and Tamaulipas. Heroin from poppy fields, marijuana by the ton, roots carved through mountains and border crossings. For every ton that crossed into Texas or Arizona, Luis carved his name deeper into the invisible empire of Mexico's underworld. But power in Michoacán was never permanent. The land was too fractured, the people too desperate, and every cartel was both predator and prey. Luis knew it. He carried it like a scar. One day you are the hunter, the next you are the hunted. The seeds of something greater were already in the soil, in the valleys, in the mountains. A man named Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes El Mencho was watching, waiting, calculating. The Valencias thought they were building an empire, but they were building something far more dangerous, because empires fade, but monsters endure. The year was 2003. The Milenio cartel had lost its head. Armando Valencia Cornelio, the man who once gave the family structure, was gone, dragged away by federal forces in a quiet raid that shattered the illusion of invincibility. For cartels, power vacuums are invitations. When a king falls, the wolves arrive, and Michoacán became a banquet table set for predators. Into that chaos stepped Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, El Mencho, a former police officer, a failed avocado farmer, a man who had learned the language of both the streets and the state. He was not born into power like the Valencias. He carved it out with bullets and calculation. At first, Mencho was an enforcer, a soldier moving shipments, a shadow operating under bigger names. But he understood the truth. Cartels are not just armies. They are corporations, and corporations need structure. They need discipline. They need someone willing to do what others fear. The Valencia cousins, Luis and Oscar Nava, needed exactly that. Their family empire was cracking. Routes into Texas and Arizona were under siege. Zetas to the east. Sinaloa pushing from the north. Guerrero splinter groups gnawing at the edges. Every day brought new gunfights, new betrayals, new bodies. Luis knew blood alone couldn't hold an empire. They needed alliances. They needed reinvention. That reinvention came through Ignacio Nacho Coronel Villarreal, Sinaloa's man in Jalisco, the Crystal King. He was the bridge. Coronel introduced Mencho as more than a sicario. He presented him as an organizer, a commander, a man who could take the Valencia's fractured network and breathe life back into it. So the deal was made. Mencho aligned with the Valencia cousins. The Sinaloa cartel opened its hand, and the corpse of the Milenio cartel began to twitch. The alliance was fragile, but it worked. Luis and El Lobo held the keys to territory. Michoacán, Colima, Jalisco. Mencho brought discipline and a new kind of violence, surgical, merciless, relentless. Sinaloa brought money, connections, international pipelines stretching into Chicago, Los Angeles, Madrid. Together they formed a triangle of survival. Valencia blood, Sinaloa capital, Mencho's steel. Under Coronel's oversight, shipments moved smoother than ever. Cocaine flowed north in record volumes. Meth labs bloomed across Jalisco's countryside, hidden behind farms and warehouses, pumping out crystal that dwarfed anything Mexico had seen before. Heroin from Michoacán's poppy fields made its way to New York, hidden in cars, trucks, cargo containers. To the outside world, it looked like the Milenio cartel had resurrected itself. But inside, the truth was darker. It wasn't resurrection. It was transformation. Because Mencho was not a partner. He was an opportunist. Every alliance was temporary. Every handshake was a countdown. And Luis, for all his bloodline, did not see the storm forming in the shadows. The reinvention of Milenio gave birth to something else. A new structure, a new language of violence. A cartel that no longer played by the old rules of smuggling and bribery, but thrived on terror as spectacle. CJNG was not yet a name, but its DNA was already alive. In every convoy of trucks, in every meth shipment, in every execution filmed and broadcast as a warning. Luis thought he had secured survival through Mencho. What he had secured was extinction, because cartels don't share power, they consume it, and Mencho was already writing his own empire with Valencia blood. In Mexico, alliances aren't marriages, they're funerals in slow motion. 2010. Mexico was burning. Ignacio Nacho Coronel, the Crystal King, Sinaloa's man in Jalisco, was gunned down by the Mexican army. Oscar El Lobo Nava Valencia, the cousin who once held the Milenio cartel together, was captured and caged. In 1 year, 2 pillars fell, and with them, the fragile balance collapsed. The Milenio cartel split like glass under pressure. No clear boss, no agreed chain of command, just fragments, each loyal to blood, money, or fear. Some factions clung to the old ways, trafficking routes, bribes to politicians, quiet deals in the shadows. Others embraced chaos. They turned to new leaders, new soldiers, new rules. At the center of it all was Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, El Mencho, the quiet enforcer who had learned discipline under Coronel's hand, the man who saw opportunity in collapse. Where others saw ashes, he saw foundation. The Valencia family gave him muscle, logistics, money, blood connections across Michoacán, Jalisco, Colima. Without them, Mencho would have remained a lieutenant in the ruins. With them, he became the architect of something new, the cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación, CJNG. It was not born in celebration, it was born in blood. At first it looked like just another splinter group. Mexico was full of them by then, tiny armies with narco flags chasing scraps of territory. But CJNG was different. Its birth was not an accident. It was design. Mencho built it like a military machine. Cells in every state. Commanders bound by loyalty and terror. A code enforced not by words, but by executions. Traitors vanished. Rivals were skinned alive. Entire police stations were wiped out as warnings. This was not just drug trafficking. This was spectacle, fear as propaganda, terror as a business model. And behind the curtain, the Valencias provided the skeleton. They knew the roots. They knew the laboratories. They had the farms, the contacts, the corrupt officials on their payroll. What Mencho brought was brutality. What the Valencias brought was infrastructure. Together, they turned Jalisco into a fortress. Convoys of armored trucks patrolled highways. Meth labs operated like factories, feeding the U.S. market at an industrial scale. Michoacán's poppy fields became rivers of heroin. Colima's ports opened as gateways for Colombian cocaine and Chinese chemicals. CJNG was no longer a splinter. It was a new state within the state. And its message was simple: obey or disappear. By 2011, their presence was undeniable. They launched a campaign called Mata Zetas, Kill the Zetas. Bodies of rivals were dumped on highways with banners signed by CJNG. To the people, they presented themselves as protectors, vigilantes fighting a common enemy. To the government, they were just another cartel. But to Mencho, it was theater, theatrics of violence, proof that fear could be marketed like a product. The Milenio cartel was gone, but its blood, its roots, its people lived on in CJNG. Luis Valencia may not have been the face, but he was the bloodstream. His family's name, his family's power, his family's fortune gave Mencho the foundation to build his monster. CJNG was not born in one day. It was a process, a mutation, a virus spreading across the Mexican underworld. And every stage of that mutation carried the fingerprint of the Valencias. By 2012, the world knew the name. By 2015, the world feared it. By 2020, it had become Mexico's most aggressive cartel. But the truth is older. CJNG was born the day Milenio fractured, the day Mencho seized the ashes, the day the Valencias chose survival over legacy. Because cartels don't die, they evolve. And evolution in Mexico always comes with a higher body count. CJNG was never created. It was inherited, in blood, in fear, in silence. Luis Valencia Valencia, a name few outside Mexico's underworld remember. No songs, no narco ballads, no myth carved into corridos or graffiti. He wasn't El Chapo. He wasn't El Mencho. He wasn't a face splashed across newspapers worldwide, but in the shadows, he mattered, because every empire needs its ghosts. After 2003, when Armando El Maradona Valencia Cornelio was captured, the Milenio cartel staggered. It didn't collapse. It adapted. Luis stepped forward, not as the warlord, but as the steward. He and his cousin, Oscar El Lobo Nava Valencia, picked up the fragments of the family empire. Routes through Jalisco, Michoacán, Colima, safe houses, warehouses, political contacts. The arteries that kept the business alive. Luis was not built for the spotlight. He was not the man holding press conferences in blood and bullets. He was the man who signed the checks. The man who ensured trucks rolled, laboratories functioned, and shipments kept moving north. Where Oscar projected command, Luis offered stability. Where Mencho brandished violence, Luis offered financing. He was the balance in an unstable equation. By the late 2000s, that balance was everything. The Sinaloa cartel leaned on the Valencias for access to corridors in western Mexico. Cocaine moved through Colima's ports. Heroin slipped through Michoacán's poppy roots. Meth spread like wildfire from Jalisco's countryside. Each line of traffic owed something to Valencia fingerprints. Luis was not a boss in the traditional sense. He was not issuing orders for public executions or orchestrating parades of violence. Instead, he was a facilitator, a regional manager in a corporation where death was the currency. And in that role, he thrived. Mencho's rise depended on men like Luis. Without infrastructure, violence is noise. Without money, terror is unsustainable. Luis gave him both, quietly, relentlessly. By the 2010s, as CJNG began its metamorphosis into Mexico's most feared cartel, Luis's position shifted. He was not the banner. He was not the war cry. But his roots, his finances, his network became the bones of the monster. And yet, history did not carve his face into legend, because Luis did not seek it. He understood a truth many capos ignored. Fame is fatal. El Chapo chased notoriety and found a cell in Colorado. La Barbie flaunted cameras and ended in chains. Mencho built myth through terror, but also became the most hunted man in Mexico. Luis chose a different path. Stay invisible, stay useful, stay alive. Even inside the family, he avoided the cult of personality that often swallows cartel bosses. Oscar El Lobo was louder, flashier, more reckless. Mencho was ambitious, ruthless, destined for dominance. Luis was neither. He was the shadow that made others shine. But shadows leave fingerprints. Every financial channel CJNG exploited. Every port, every hidden laboratory, every municipal police chief on the payroll. They all carried traces of the Valencia family. To the outside world, CJNG appeared as Mencho's creation, a single man's empire. But inside the machinery, it was different. It was a blend. Mencho's ruthlessness, Sinaloa's connections, and Valencia money. Luis's name faded as CJNG's reputation grew. The branding belonged to Mencho. The fear belonged to Mencho. But the foundation, that was Luis's silent work. He was not the architect. He was the financier, the protector, the quiet shareholder in Mexico's deadliest corporation. And in the world of cartels, invisibility is not weakness. It is survival, because those who live in the shadows often live the longest. Luis Valencia never chased the crown. He built the throne others sat on. Cartels are families, not by choice, by blood. And blood, in Mexico, is destiny. The Valencia name did not die with Milenio. It mutated, it spread. It became the financial bloodstream of CJNG. At the center stood Los Quinis, a clan within the clan. Named after the Quinique squirrel, small but cunning, fast but elusive. The nickname was a joke, but the business was no joke. Abigail Gonzalez Valencia, Mencho's brother-in-law, took the reins. Quiet, calculating. Not a warrior like Mencho, not a killer in the streets, but a financier, the banker of blood. While Mencho built his army, Abigail built the war chest. Real estate in Guadalajara, businesses in Mexico City, shell companies stretching into Panama, Colombia, Spain. The Queenas became specialists in money laundering, turning rivers of narco cash into legitimate businesses. Hotels, construction firms, luxury imports, billions of dollars cleaned, invested, recycled. By 2015, U.S. authorities ranked Los Quinis as one of the wealthiest trafficking groups on the planet. Their meth empire rivaled multinational corporations. The DEA called Abigail the richest drug trafficker you've never heard of. Because while El Chapo craved attention, Abigail craved silence. Silence was profitable. Silence was survival. But silence does not last forever. In 2015, Mexican Marines captured Abigail in a luxury restaurant in Guadalajara. No shots, no spectacle, just a man in a suit, escorted into the shadows of custody. By 2017, he was extradited to the United States. His empire shaken, but not destroyed, because Los Quines were not one man. They were a dynasty. José González Valencia, Abigail's brother, stepped forward. He kept the channels open. He kept the money flowing. Even after being arrested in Brazil in 2017, even after years of trials and extradition battles, his role as financier remained crucial. In 2025, a U.S. court sentenced him to 30 years. Another Valencia removed from the chessboard. But the board itself remains. The structure still functions. Shell companies still move cash. Port access still exists. And the Valencia bloodline still runs through CJNG's veins. That is their legacy. Not the gunfights, not the bodies on highways, but the invisible empire of finance, the machinery that makes CJNG more than a cartel, a global corporation of crime. Michoacán to Jalisco, Guadalajara to Madrid, California to Colombia. Every route, every port, every corridor still carries Valencia fingerprints, because terror alone cannot build an empire. It burns too fast. To last, a cartel needs accountants as much as assassins. It needs men who count money while others count bullets. The Valencias were those men. Today, Mencho is hunted. CJNG wages war across Mexico, fighting the Sinaloa cartel for dominance. Bodies pile up. Towns burn. The government promises victory. But behind the spectacle, the Valencia structure endures. The world remembers Mencho's face. The world remembers CJNG's violence. But few remember Luis Valencia, or Abigail, or Jose. Yet their work, quiet, invisible, relentless, is what allows CJNG to still function like a state within the state. Because in organized crime, the killers make the headlines, the financiers make history, and history is still being written with Valencia blood. The Valencias stopped being kings. They became architects, and their blueprints still bleed.